Thank you for joining the webinar. We're going to talk about putting hype into InDesign and exporting with in5 so that you can create really, really cool interactive and animated pieces inside your digital magazines and other projects. And we've actually got the people from Hype today to show it directly to you. Now, let me go through what we're going to talk about. We're going to do a quick introduction of everybody on here. And then I'll show you the live examples of the actual documents we're going to work with really quickly. And then I'm going to hand it off to Jonathan at Hype, and he's actually going to show you Hype if you haven't seen it before. So if you're new to Hype, it's going to be a great introduction. And if you're new to InDesign, or excuse me, in5, I'll try and give you a sense of what in5 does and how it works with Hype. And we'll actually show the process of embedding the Hype content into InDesign. And then we're going to have a Q&A. And we're going to roll pretty quickly. It's basically going to be an overview. If you have questions at any point, you can put them in the chat pod or the Q&A. And we've got people in there answering them. And we're going to have, of course, this time at the end to talk about that as well. So let me stop sharing for a moment, and we'll just say hi to everybody. I'm switching to the gallery so I can see them all. Why don't I'll introduce the people from Ajar first. We've got Erica Gamet on. And you want to say hi, Erica?
Hey, everybody, how's it going?
And we got Myra Ferguson. And I think she's muted.
I'm muted. Sorry, typing in, multitasking.
Yep.
Hi, everybody.
She's already working in there answering your questions. And April Clark.
Hello. Good to see everybody.
And they're all going to be answering questions as we're going through. And then we have Jonathan from Hype.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
And we also have Daniel from Hype.
Yeah.
All right. And they will be obviously showing their very cool product, and you'll have a chance to ask questions of them as well. And let me go back to sharing, and I will show you the document that we're going to be basically working on. So if you are new to in5, this will kind of give you a sense of what it does. First of all, this presentation was actually made in InDesign and exported with in5. So I want to give you a sense of just the broadness of the type of content you can create. So starting with that, then this is the document that we're really going to be taking a look at most. And it's designed with these simple animations, this navigation. This is all built in InDesign with in5. And then this much more sophisticated piece was made with Hype. And it has animation that plays, but also it can be manually navigated. So it's pretty cool. And you've got a video in here as well. And just give you a sense of the whole piece. But really, we're going to be focused on this page with the Hype piece here. Again, if you're new to in5, I was just going to show you, I spent a little time with this document and reworked it just to create different versions to show you the variety. So this is a kind of a flip book version with basically the same content, but reworked for different page sizes. And I'm just waiting for the user interface Zoom to disappear. Show this one. Okay, so this is a kind of a website version. It's got this parallax image, this go to top button, and navigation items here. And then I also made it responsive. So there's a separate version for a smaller screen, like a phone or a vertical tablet. And here's our Hype piece in there. So those are the documents that I created just to show you kind of what we can do. But again, we're going to be largely focusing on the one that's in here. And that's basically what we're looking at. And then a very quick plug, if you are interested in that scrolling website, we just put out a course by Keith Gilbert that walks you through how to make that type of scrolling website, to make the fixed menu at the top, and to make the responsive version. So you can check that out on Ajar Academy. Now let's take a look at Hype. I'm going to stop sharing and hand everything over to Jonathan, and he is going to show you Hype. So let me get back to the right screen, and I'm going to make Jonathan the host, and he should be able to drive from there.
Okay, good morning or good afternoon or good evening to everyone. So as Justin said, I am one of the creators of Tumult Hype. Hype is software that allows you to make animated and interactive HTML5 content. As such, the output can be put in many places, including an InDesign document, and then output to the web or for other digital publications from there. So what I thought I would do is give a brief overview of the software, show some of the ins and outs with a demo, and then give a few details on the document that Justin was just showing. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everyone at least on the panel see my screen right now? That good? Okay, great. So Hype should be pretty familiar if you've used tools like Keynote or After Effects. It's really similar to slideshow software with a timeline interface. If you've used InDesign, at least the canvas part will be pretty familiar from there. Let me show a couple just demo documents to show some of the things that people have made with Hype. So Hype ranges the gamut of doing everything from like advertisements to infographics. People have done children's books. This is a infographic I like. This one has a lot of information. It's kind of about the solar system or the sun. Now, of course, the problem with showing animated content over Zoom is you're probably not getting the whole frame rate effect. So you'll have to bear with me and believe that it looks pretty fantastic, at least on my screen. You can download these demo documents on our site if you're interested. But you can see that there's a lot of sophisticated animation, even animating along different paths, doing morphs of those paths, having interactivity. And so this is the type of document that you can make with Tumult Hype. And even though this one's pretty complex, the basics of working with Hype are simple. So you have a typical canvas view, and let's say we wanted to build maybe some sort of infographic about the life cycle of bees. Bees are commonly animated. We can do that. So you can add elements to the stage. Let's say we want some sort of sky background. We can add a rectangle, maybe remove a border, set a specific color. So this can be our basic background. Of course, you can also add text-based elements. So we can say bee, life cycle, like so. And there's a lot of sophistication here. You can add Google fonts if you'd like. So you can choose a different font that you want. Scale it up. And this is all powered by HTML5. So if we want, we can actually go in and modify this. So if we wanted to add, let's say, HTML tags, we could do something like that. And so you can see this is all live as I type, and it's just HTML. Of course, Hype also supports adding various assets. So if I want, let's say I have a bee image in here, I can do that. And the heart of Hype is being able to animate content. And so in Hype, we try to make this as easy as possible. the main way to do it is through a record button. So you can just hit record, set the timeline playhead to wherever you want, and just drag and drop. And just like that, you have an animation. And so Hype uses a keyframe-based animation system. So you can see at the bottom, there's various keyframes that indicated the start, which is where I recorded, and the end. You can, of course, create keyframes manually if you'd like, and that'll make the animation as well. But really the record flow, I think, handles most cases because that'll automatically make the keyframes from point A to point B. One of the other things that you can do, it's a little hard to see because my background's blue, so why don't I try when I make that a little bit lighter. Is that we have the motion path that represents where the bee is flying to. And so with Hype, it's very easy. Let's say we wanted this to be a little bit more of a curved flight pattern. All you need to do is drag that path out. And it's like a Bezier curve, so you can adjust however you'd like. You can even do things like make sure that the rotation of the bee follows the flight of the path. And so just like that, we have a nice curved animation. And we can preview this in the browser. This is all HTML5, so we have individual elements, selectable text, it's accessible. You can go ahead and inspect if you really want to get into debugging at all the elements. So just like that, you have a pretty basic animation, but that was easy to create. Hype is also about a lot of interactivity. So let's say you wanted to perhaps go to a different scene, which is kind of like a different slide in Keynote. So we'll just say scene 2 here. On the first scene, we can simply add a button. And now for interactivity, we have this action inspector. And so we can do something like, say, on mouse click, we could jump to the next scene, for example, maybe do a swap transition. And so now if we hit that, it transitions to the next scene. But there's a lot of different interactivity that we can do. For example, we can run JavaScript if there's added programming like logic that you want to do. We provide an API to control a lot of the basics of the animated elements. This can also be used to control some of in5's output. For example, you can move to different pages. And that's in the document that'll be shown a little bit later. But there's other interactivity, such as starting different timelines. So one of the neat things about Hype and interactivity is that not everything is just on this main timeline. So if you wanted animations to run in parallel, which can give you pretty sophisticated effects, you can do that as well. So let's say, let me move this B down. You wanted to have some clouds in the background. Well, you may want to first draw out that cloud. So I'll create a, I'll use the pencil to draw a vector shape. We'll make this just white. And I'm using the mouse, so you'll have to forgive my pretty terrible artwork right there. And so now I have a cloud, and maybe I want this cloud to move across the sky. So what I can do is make a new timeline. And now I can animate this moving slowly over the course of several seconds. So I'll hit record again and just kind of move that across. And so now we have two different timelines. The main timeline always gets triggered automatically. The secondary timeline will just say on scene load. What we'll do is we'll start that timeline. And so now we have these two items. Oops, I started the main timeline there. Start the untitled timeline. So now we have the cloud moving like so. That's a pretty static cloud. First of all, it's a little odd that it kind of moves slowly, moves quickly, and then slows down again. So to make this look a little bit better, we'll do a couple things with it. Let's go back here. So first of all, we'll change the timing function from ease in, ease out. That's what let it go slow to begin with and fast at the end. We can change this just to be linear. Oops, that means it moves at the same rate all the way across. And for a little bit more fun, what we'll do is make another timeline that has the cloud change shape a little bit. So we'll call this cloud shape. And so what we'll do here is we'll actually do a vector shape morph. So we'll go in, edit the shape. We'll change to the pencil tool, and we'll just record going into another shape, like so. And so now we can see that there's actually a shape morph of this cloud going from one shape to another. And this is something we just like to loop back and forth a little bit. So for this timeline, we can actually have some more interactivity in the case of timeline actions. So this timeline will run forward. And now what we can do is we can just go ahead and add a timeline action on the timeline that gets triggered at specific points in time. And we can say continue, play in reverse. And so that means then it'll start looping back this way. And we'll want one more just to keep this infinitely looping to say continue running forward. And so likewise, we will want to kick this off. We can chain another action to say start timeline with our cloud shape. And so just like that, you have a shape morphing, repeating cloud timeline in the background, the beam moving, everything like that. So hopefully that's a basic idea of some of the main constructs with Hype and how easy it is to make relatively sophisticated animations with a degree of interactivity. So Hype really marries those two things together. So let me open up the document that Justin showed in the beginning and just give a quick walkthrough on that one. So this one's a little bit more complex, but uses the same basic building block principles. The screen is a little cramped. And bear with me while I try to move all the zoom controls getting in the way of working with this. So in this document, there's a few different areas of animation. One is that it's building in vector shape-based paths as I go across as part of the build-up. Another area is that there's this timeline that actually builds the graph and shows the various different states. And so if we look closely at this animation, you can see it's doing an effect like it's blurring the background of the lake to show that. It's building in this graph. And then also this control right here actually has drag actions. So this will bind how the user drags the element to the control of the timeline. So if I actually preview this document, you can see the graph builds in, but at any point I can go ahead and drag this, and that's bound to the timeline. So that's a lot of interactivity right there as well. And you can see I have, it's similar to the cloud, a little bit of a repeating loop with the boat right there. And you can see that it looks like the boat's going up and down with the waves. This is actually using the physics engine in Hype. So I can drag the boat and drop it, and it'll go up and down and interact with the waves. Unfortunately, the boat has capsized. Hopefully this is not the Suez Canal. So that's a lot of that's the general document that we're working with. So hopefully you saw from the basic B example to this lake example, how you can use the building blocks of Hype to create very advanced documents that can go into your InDesign digital publication. So hopefully you were able to follow a lot of that. I think I'll hand it over to Justin to show the next steps on this document now.
Awesome. Nice job, Jonathan. That's really cool.
Okay, whoops. Okay, looks like your host now.
Grab it. I'm going to share my screen. One thing that you reminded me of, Jonathan, that I forgot to show was that you did create this button. And we did discover in the process of doing this, if you want to have Hype interact with the in5 document on the outside, that you do need to put it on a server. So you notice this one is on a live URL, but this learn more on page 5 button, when I click it, actually takes us to page 5 in the document. So that's another pretty darn cool thing in terms of working with the two products together. Let me go into InDesign. So this is going to be quite a bit shorter than looking at hype, because there's so many cool things to look at hype, and putting it into InDesign is actually really, really straightforward. This is my document, and I just created a placeholder for the hype piece, and I made it gray. So I'm going to get rid of that background. I'm just going to change it to none, and then I'm going to go up to File, Place, and hype is able to export the raw HTML, but it also will create this package file, which is an OAM. Now you can actually put either of those into InDesign using in5, but the OAM is just so simple because it's built into InDesign's functionality. So all I have to do is select that OAM file and click open to place it on the selected item I have. And InDesign will attempt to render a preview. This time it did it perfectly, which I'm kind of amazed at. But sometimes, I just see like a gray box there. Don't worry about that. It'll be fine when it exports. It's just InDesign's HTML renderer is a little bit outdated. And it didn't change the size. But that is one thing to watch out for, because the first time I placed this, it edited the size. The renderer got a little confused. And so I just had to make sure that I went and set this back to 800 by 678, which is the size of the hype piece that I wanted to show up. And from that point, all I have to do is export. So I'm going to go ahead and save it before I export. And then I would go up to in5. Now, the easiest way to do it is the easy export wizard. And that way I can just choose the type of document that I'm creating. This one, I want it to have sort of that modern digital look or like an app look. Either one of those will work. I'll click next, say that I want pixel perfect text, click next, give it a title, and I can export. Now there is a more advanced editor if you, export. If you go up to File and choose Export HTML5, then you can get all these types of options and have like granular detail. So the difference here, you'd see like this is the slider fade in format. That's the look of the main piece. But then there's also borderless scroll, which is like the website look. There's the flipbook look. You don't really need to know all these, but I wanted to show you the export dialog. If you haven't seen it, there's just a lot of detail that you can put in here. You can have it scale to the window, which we do have. But that's the basic process. And if you want to do the quick and dirty version, you just go to the easy export wizard and choose one of these options and just go through and export it. And then what you have on the other end is this piece right here, which I'll refresh. And I'll just show you, we've got some simple animations coming in here as part of the document and some navigation. But again, if you want this super nifty thing, and I didn't even know about the physics piece. Oop, that went away. That might have something to do with the fact of the two playing together that we'll have to look at. But you can see that this is beyond what you can do in InDesign. In terms of like, you can't have an animation playing and then stop it and say, hey, I want to adjust this. Can I roll that back? Just crazy cool stuff. And so if you didn't know about hype, now you do. And if it looks complicated for you, there's always the possibility of having somebody else work on the animation. If you've got somebody else on your team who's more comfortable with that, or who likes getting into code, wants to make custom stuff, then you have the opportunity to collaborate with them, because you can see how these workflows could be essentially completely independent. You can agree on a size frame. Let me go back and forward again. We'll just reset everything. You can agree on a size frame, and they can work on their content, and you know what colors you're working with, and then once they're done with a piece, all they have to do is export it to an OAM, and all you have to do is place it in your InDesign document. And so it could be a tool for you to level up your animation interactivity in these types of pieces, or it could be an opportunity to collaborate with somebody who has those skills. So let's now, let me check my notes and make sure I'm not missing anything. I think we're to the Q&A portion, and I see there's been a lot of questions in there. If you want to ask a question live, you can raise your hand from the menu at the bottom. There's a raise hand button, and I can unmute you, and you can feel free to ask the question live. You can also put it in the chat, and I'll open up now to everybody who's Myra and Erica and April. If you guys have running questions that you want to ask as people are gathering their final questions, or if anybody wants to raise their hand in the meantime.
There is a question from Doug in the Q&A. What multimedia file formats can you use with Hype?
Okay, I can take that. So in general, there's various different categories. So if you're talking about image file formats, Hype generally is targeted towards the web. So nearly anything you could use on the web, you can use within Hype. So of course, standard image formats would be JPEG or GIF or GIF if you so desire. You can also bring in SVGs. They're treated as an image. And there's probably, various other web image formats. From a audio and video perspective, you can bring in video. When you do, you have the option to add different sources. So it's less of an issue nowadays, but originally on the web, various browsers or platforms supported different video format types. So Safari would support MP4, which you can bring into Hype, but Firefox liked OGV videos and Chrome like WebM videos. And so when you bring in, let's say, a video format, you get slots to bring in the various different types. And it's the same story with audio in that regard. So hopefully that answered it. It's basically anything available that you could do on the web are the formats that Hype supports importing. Because of the specific web view, if you were to bring in like an OGG video or audio, Hype won't play that back natively because it uses WebKit, and that's more of a Firefox thing. But if you preview in Firefox, then that will show up. So it's always important to think about what you see in Hype, but also what your target is. And Hype provides some guidance in that regard. So if you only have one format, it'll actually say, oh, on this browser, you're missing this video format, for example. It'll give a little bit of a warning there to guide you along the way. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and thank goodness Firefox seems to have caught up, because I think we're generally pretty safe these days just using MP4 and MP3, which is great. It's so much simpler.
Yeah, I think, every release of Hype, we kind of update the what are we going to show warnings for, and we also kind of boost things. But if you're trying to deploy to some really old browser, you'll be able to see a lot of those older warnings. But for most of them nowadays, yeah, MP4 is good enough.
Awesome. I'm going to take a question from somebody who has their hand up. I saw Carolyn had your hand up, but has dropped away. If you still want to ask your question, go ahead and, now I see. I'm going to go ahead and let Carolyn talk because she was first in line. And you just need to unmute yourself.
Hi. Thank you for this. This is amazing. So I sort of manage a group of about 30 or 40 designers, and I'm wondering how hard would this be to implement? I mean, we would have to change our entire way of doing things, which is a little bit, I think, my job, to introduce new, advances to show the client, like the idea of wowing the client with some of these things, because we're a packaging firm, and to be able to show, labels that rotate and animate, and to be able to show, we do a lot of stuff with multimedia, showing, interactive multimedia and all those kinds of things. We tried initially doing some of these things in InDesign and exporting to PDF, and it was a nightmare. And even so much so as I had a long, run-in with Adobe on how to fix it, and they sort of fixed it, but not enough. to be able. So we stopped doing all those things. So this looks like that could be cool, but I just wondered, I mean, how hard is this? If I was, this would be probably a headache for me, but how hard would this be to roll out as a new format to teach people, you know, here's this cool new technology. We could be the cutting edge of presentations with this kind of stuff, right? How hard is it be? And could I even maybe potentially create templates that people could customize? You know, like if I had a rotating bottle, I think someone had asked that before, like if you placed an object in InDesign and then you just replaced it, would it automatically update? You know, is it linked? Is it like a linked file situation? I'm sorry, I have a lot of questions, but I'm just trying to figure out, is this something that my company could use, and how hard would it be to implement a whole change in technology?
I think, Jonathan, you guys have like a demo or a trial version of Hype available that they can use?
Yeah, so I mean, I would definitely recommend doing testing out and seeing how it works for your workflow. I think one of the neat things about the integration, at least here, it sounds like maybe you already do use InDesign, is that you can just use Hype for very small, specific interactive pieces and then expand it out as you need. So I would definitely recommend trying with Hype. Right now we have a 14-day fully functional trial. It doesn't watermark or anything, so you can use Hype to your heart's content and try it out there. If you need a little bit more time, feel free to contact me or Daniel. Just go to our website and there's a support link there. And that's probably the best way to kind of figure it out. I would say, yeah, trying small amounts and growing from there would be my a little bit more general advice. And yeah, I think that's probably the way I would go about doing it.
Yeah, I think so. In5 also offers a trial, but it's sort of the inverse, where it's an unlimited time, but it is feature limited and watermarked. So I would suggest, you know, trying a trial of both of them. I think the main difference you might experience versus the formats you're used to is that it's not something you can easily send over in an you don't send it in an email like as a file like you would with a PDF. Generally, this is not the only way to deliver it, but generally you're probably going to be delivering it by putting it on the web, like how I put the piece on the web and you can see the URL, which just means uploading it to a web server and then sharing the URL. So you're emailing the URL instead of a PDF file. Now with the PDF format, I mean, you know, we hear this a lot, and so you know, I almost have an eye roll, because it's like, yes, unfortunately, PDF, we have this expectation that PDF is going to support interactivity like this, and it just doesn't, not in any way, shape, or form. And it's fortunate that like Adobe does just say that up front, but the PDF format just doesn't do it, but HTML does. As you can see with both of these technologies, they're both based on HTML, and you really, you're now, it's like cutting edge kind of still, but it's like, it's also really well established. So you're not going out on a limb using these formats. I think the biggest difference is going to be learning to put it on a web server and share a URL. That's going to be your difference in process. But in terms of your workflow, I don't think that's going to change much. You can use InDesign templates. You can update the stuff, and then you just have to re-export it like you would re-export a PDF. And then, you know, if the files are going online, you have to replace those files online. But your workflow can, I mean, there's definitely no problem working with large teams. And as you're seeing with these two products, it's really easy to segment the pieces that you're working on and have one person working on something in parallel with somebody else. You know, one person working on layout, another person working on an interactive piece with animation that then goes into the layout. So hopefully that answers most of the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I have a million of them, but I don't want to take up all your time.
Okay, well, we'll let a few people more answer questions. You can also email our support at any time, and then maybe we'll come back around to you now if once everybody else has a chance to ask questions. I'm going to let Karine talk here. Karine, please unmute and go ahead.
Yes, I put my question on the chat also, and I had a formation in Brussels in Hype and in 5. So I'm trying to use them, and I wanted to do as a sort of a book and drawing through the pages, but I didn't get through it to Hype. How can I do the interactivity without a button through the scene, if it's possible? I don't know. I don't know if my English is good enough, and if you got my question.
It sounded like you were trying to do interactivity not through a button. I didn't quite catch how you wanted to achieve
I have several scenes, and I wanted to have a sort of like an opening book very fast.
Okay.
Animation, but I didn't.
So there may be ways on the in5 side to do this. I'll answer from, if you were thinking about it, more of a Hype majority document.
No, it's just an animation, a sort of to show very quickly the inside of the book.
So you're like opening up a book and flipping pages.
And then the pages, you have the pages, 2 or 4 pages going quite fast.
So one thing that we saw happen frequently was that for, let's say, iBooks Author, which is where we saw a lot of books coming from, the kind of packaging format was easy to use, and you would just export as a widget. And so Hype itself has a few various ways of making book-like experiences. Probably not as good as a book itself, but one is like you can swipe on pages. It also has a 3D effect. So we've seen some page turns. There's some issues with there being a lot of perspective on that. Another thing that you can do is Hype has the notion of symbols. So if you're repeating content, you can actually place all that content into a symbol. And then let's say on the first page, you can have a duplicate of that symbol. So it's the exact same content ultimately, but you can animate that in a different way. So let's say you wanted to have certain effects like a flipping. If everything was a symbol later on, you could copy those symbols, just have a different instance and do some sort of quick animation. So I don't know if that answers the question.
So I have to do it with symbols. It would be easier.
That's probably the approach I would take. There's, of course, with a tool like Hype, there's a lot of different ways to do different things. I mean, it could be something as you take screenshots of the scene and then put those in also, depending on how you want to work with it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Karine. I'm going to now have Robert talk. You can unmute when you're ready, Robert.
Yeah, thank you. So having never heard of InDesign before, I'm currently using Hype to build web interactives. How would I integrate InDesign into my workflow? Like, I'm still not sure exactly what that can do for me.
It really depends. I would say it's kind of like down to what is the difference in purpose between the files. InDesign's initial reason for existing is to create print documents. in5 extends it to being more of an interactive tool, but I would say it's still of a document nature. So there's a wide variety, as you saw with the pieces. So I created the presentation slides in there, but then there was our initial experience, which has those like fade in transitions. Then there's a flip book with the page peels, and then there's one that looks like a scrolling website. But they're all essentially the ideas. You have these pages and you're navigating through them. And so, it doesn't have the precise dials that Hype does in terms of creating super sophisticated animation, and you can create interactivity, but it's kind of limited to what is in InDesign, right? Manipulating the things that are in InDesign. But then on the flip side, it has this sort of document setup. So it might just be a little more natural or fluid to create something that has a lot of pages to it. If it's not, it doesn't make sense for it to be scenes, then, and it's more like page. And then
So
maybe
I'm sorry to interrupt. Is that more in like a navigation sense? Like, is it like more robust navigations in a sense?
it certainly has the navigation. I think based on my knowledge of Hype, you could create very similar things in Hype that you're creating in InDesign and in5, but you're going to have an easier time creating certain things with InDesign and in5 just because they're oriented toward that. So yes, if it's like a page-based thing that's mostly page navigation, then InDesign might be easier to set that up just because it's geared toward that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for your question. Do we have any questions from the Q&A or chat pod? We should.
Yeah, there are a few in the Q&A, a couple.
There are a lot in the chat also.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Probably won't get
people
to all
don't
of
be
them.
shy about raising your hand. We'd be happy to talk to you and answer the questions too. Erica, can we get one from the
Yeah,
Q&A?
one of the questions was, does Hype support responsive page design? The example didn't seem to play nice when the window was resized. So, and if it does, can that be handed over to in5?
I want to let you guys talk about that because it is your product, but I can say yes. When I was playing around with this, so the initial piece was not necessarily responsive, and when I was playing around and I had these different page sizes, like this one, I actually went in and I was like, I'm curious, how do I make this responsive? And it took me a few minutes of like looking up documentation. But if you look at this as I shrink the page down, oops, it's gone fully responsive. This does shrink down. Maybe this isn't the best example actually, because in5 is doing this responsive, but how can I show this? This piece is a different size than the original. Anyway, I had to make it responsive in order to do that. But I'm realizing that the scaling is all being done by in5, so it's not a great example to share. But yes, it took me about 10 minutes and I figured out how to do it. So I just wanted to say that as somebody who's using Hype for basically the first time. Yeah, why don't I let the guys from Hype answer?
Do you want to answer, Daniel?
Sure. Yeah, the quick answer is yes, it does. We have lots of features for making different layouts for mobile design. I can quickly share a quick version in the chat.
Yeah, let me. Oh, you got it in the chat.
Okay.
I can make you host if you want to share your screen too, Daniel.
Oh, that's fine. Well, I can share something that actually I made for Kickstarter that has a mobile and desktop version. And yeah, I basically said, okay, if you're looking at a tall phone screen, show this layout. But if you're on a desktop and the ratio is a little wider, show this. So yeah, we can post some documentation links in the chat to answer that question. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's. Well, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say that there's two basic systems. One is that you can decide how you want items to rearrange, and then the other is like you can make entirely different layouts also. And then I assume they fit into InDesign in like a web view. So based on that size, then it will just inherit the responsiveness and do the right thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I ran into is when I started designing those alternate ones, because I thought, oh, well, it'd be nice to just, if people were showing up and they'd never seen in5 before, I could show that you can, you've got these different types of content. It doesn't always look like this. And so I was, reworking my InDesign file. So instead of having these nice wide portrait pages, I had these, thin letter size pages for the flipbook. And what I did was go into Hype and basically grouped all of the stuff together. And I was just able to say, I just want this to shrink as the piece shrinks. And so then when I placed it in InDesign in a different size container, it just fit the container for me, which was great. It was really straightforward. And I did see that there was also the option to have like breakpoints and actually have it, have a more dramatic shift if I wanted it to change in a mobile layout. So those are both really cool. And it only took me a few minutes to figure out, not even knowing if I could do it. I just looked it up and they had good documentation on it and figured it out pretty quickly. So that was cool. All right. Myra, do we have any questions from chat we should address?
Yes, there are several questions. And I was trying to watch the chat too, so you may have covered these. Someone asked about the learning curve. Talk about the learning curve that's involved.
For which product?
I don't know. I think it was for the Hype part, but I'm not sure. Because I think it was during the Hype demonstration.
Well, I'll talk to my part and then maybe Justin, you can talk about your learning curve. So in general, it depends on your background. If you have a background in animation, then there's not that much learning curve because it uses keyframe animation system. So if you've used products like or motion graphics or video like After Effects, Adobe Animate, then you should be relatively at home in Hype's interface. If you haven't, there are some animation principles that you'll need to learn. But ultimately, we wanted to make the product as easy to use as like Keynote or PowerPoint, plus this timeline and interactive element. It's also a pretty gentle cycle where doing simple animations is pretty easy. And as you explore more, hopefully those open up, you'll say, oh, how would I go about doing this? And then maybe be able to figure it out based on the building blocks you've had in the past. So we haven't gotten too much feedback on it being hard to use aside from one or two concepts. But if you do have difficulty, the good news is we have pretty active support forums online. You'll see me and Daniel there quite a bit. We're also happy to answer emails and help out. We have tutorial videos. There's a few courses as well. And with that, there is a trial. So I definitely recommend just trying to animate and experiment, play around with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add it's quick to pick up, but takes a lifetime to master. That's all.
You mentioned the free trial. Someone also asked, how long is the free trial of Hype?
14 days.
14 days, okay.
Yeah, that's great. And I must confess, so I was using it first time, but I also spent a lot of time animating. So some of that stuff might be more familiar to me than other people. But generally, the concepts are all stuff you're going to be familiar with from using any of these applications. Grouping things and adjusting properties on elements. So I would encourage anybody to open up the trial and try it out. Because like I said, I was able to make the thing responsive pretty quickly. I just opened it up and was like, oh, what do I need to do? I'll group these things together. I figured out how to do that. And where's the responsive part? And, with like one help document, I was able to kind of figure that out. And that piece was pretty sophisticated, but it was also straightforward. So yeah, I would encourage people to try it out. We still have,
okay, I have more questions if you have, okay.
Oh, go ahead.
So how is Hype different from Lottie and Adobe After Effects? And then I'll throw in there also, someone asked, they already have Animate from the Creative Suite. So what would be some reasons that they should use Hype instead?
Okay, I can take that. So speaking strictly on Adobe After Effects, there's not really, and I'm saying this as like a not pro user, so there may be a few details I get wrong, first of all. I know Hype, I don't know After Effects as well. But After Effects is geared towards video production and motion graphics. And therefore, the two main differences there is its output is intended to originally be video, and there's no interactivity in video formats. Now, where Lottie comes into play is you can take the various assets and shapes and export those to a HTML5 player. So it kind of takes the data and then re-renders. And I believe Lottie even has hooks for interactivity. But in general, those are basic hooks. And so Hype, the original format is HTML5. So what you see in Hype is pretty much exactly what you're going to get in the browser. And you're working with browser native formats. In the first part of the demo, for example, I showed editing text with HTML tags. I don't know if you can do that in After Effects since it's not geared towards that. There's also all the different responsive capabilities and interactivity built in. And you can extend interactivity with code. I think that's basically how you have to do it in Lottie, but there's a lot of primitives in Hype that allow you to do interactivity without code. So I'd say those are the main differences, but it's really dealing with a web native format that understands web browsers and web technology versus dealing with maybe a tool you're familiar with, which is Adobe After Effects, and trying to shoehorn that into the web via Lottie. So it depends. I would say, if you're really familiar with After Effects and your types of documents are not going to be interactive at all, then you may want to stick with that. But there's a lot of advantages to Hype, especially even file size. Hype is optimized to deliver good file sizes. And I guess the other one was compared to Adobe Animate. And Adobe Animate is in many ways the same basic problem, is in that Adobe Animate came from the heritage of Flash, which also is not really a web native format in exactly the same way. And so Adobe has been trying to kind of shoehorn more and more web features into Animate since they canceled their other product, which was Edge Animate. But I think you'll find that there's a lot of edges from Animate's heritage of being, first of all, a hand-drawn animation tool or a vector animation tool that got shoehorned into trying to output to a web format, which was Swift files, and then to now being tried to exporting to HTML5. So there's some mismatches there.
Okay, there's some more Hype questions. In Hype, is it possible to have an interaction between scenes without a button in order to turn the pages?
I guess my question is, how are you turning the page? But if you mean doing like a swipe action, those do exist in Hype. So you can say on swipe, do a page turn action. So that's probably the easiest way. If you're talking more from the, I want something to kind of run on another scene, but I still want to see it on the scene, there is a construct called a persistent symbol. And a symbol is kind of like a mini scene within a scene. It's a reusable content. And the persistent bit means it's always running in the background, where it's running wherever it shows up. And so you can keep using that. And that definitely I would recommend looking at the documentation on that, because there's quite a few things to get to that point, but there are various constructs. So hopefully that answers the question.
So, and actually that goes into this next question, because kind of like the symbol idea, someone said is the B like a smart object in Photoshop, meaning that if I did edits to the B in Illustrator, I could swap it out with a new B after the animation was created. Basically, can I create all the objects in Illustrator and update as smart objects if there were updates?
So the answer is yes and no. It's a smart object in so much that the original reference to the image is always there, so you can scale it and not worry about the losing bits when you do the scaling. If it's a single image file, if you edit that image, then go back to Hype, Hype will say, hey, it looks like your original was updated. Do you want to update Hype's copy of the image, or do you want to keep Hype's copy of it? So you can choose to automatically replace or not, which is nice for a workflow. The area where it's not is that Hype doesn't really import like an Illustrator file or a Photoshop file as a layered image format right now. So you would need to do the export to a flat file in those applications for it to be imported properly into Hype at this point. It's of course a great feature if we had layered image imports, but we don't at this point.
Jonathan, there's another question about that. Can people just copy and paste from Illustrator into Hype and other vector apps as well? Can you, will it accept vectors pasted in?
So yes-ish. Again, there's always a caveat here and there. So if you were in Illustrator and copied and pasted, it would paste as a SVG image file. So you can copy and paste, but it kind of does the flattening automatically to be an SVG file. Hype, I showed some shape tools. So Hype does have a basic vector shape editor, and that actually outputs SVG, but it does not currently have the ability to edit SVG files directly. So Hype kind of has its own view of shapes, and there's SVG files, and Hype's own view will output an SVG file, if that makes sense. But you can't take an SVG file currently in Hype and edit that directly. But of course, that would be another very nice feature for Hype to have.
And does Hype support or allow for drag and drop interactive?
Yes, specifically out of the box, Hype supports dragging. So in the action inspector, you can have an on drag action. And there's a few different things that you can do with that. One is the ability to control the timeline, which is what we saw in the Lake Mead demo document of I took that little scroll thumb and I moved that across. And so that was controlling the timeline. You can also control the element position. So you can just kind of move it wherever, which is I think what this question is about. And then you can also have JavaScript run on every movement of a drag. And so that's how you would implement dropping behaviors, that you would need a little bit of code to figure out what you want to drop on. Hype doesn't have the drop part of it built in, but if you look on the forums, there are some pretty canonical ways of doing this where I think you just drag in like a script or something, and then you can add a couple properties to the element and get drag and drop behavior through that.
Okay. And then someone also asked, is Hype available for Windows?
No.
No. Okay.
But it's good to know that there's people wanting that.
Let's see.
Hey,
And
just a second. I
go
just
ahead.
want to just a broadcasting note here. We're at an hour. I'm perfectly happy to stay on. We have over 100 people still on there. So clearly there's interest in people getting their questions answered. I don't know, Jonathan and Daniel, what your availability is, but I'm happy to stay on and answer questions, and I'm happy to keep the webinar going so long as people have questions.
Yep, definitely happy to keep going and answer questions. Yep.
Awesome. Well, if anybody has to leave, we'll say goodbye. Thank you for joining. And but if you have questions and you just want to stay on and hear more answers, we'll keep going for a bit. So
yep. I think you said, Justin, the recording will be available after also, right?
yes, and we will make the recording available.
Great.
Awesome.
And I would also say if we haven't gotten to your question, maybe go ahead and put it in the Q&A pod or in the chat, either one, so that we can make sure to get them, because when there was a lot of questions, it's easy to miss things.
Yep. And I see Alan's got his hand raised. We'll get to him. Myra, go ahead with the question you were about to start, and then
Okay.
Alan, we'll get to you after that.
Okay. Can animated image sequences import into Hype and create a swiping effect similar to in5?
I have not used in5's feature on that, so Justin, maybe you can let me know where things are different, but you can import animated image sequences into Hype. Actually, is the question written out?
It's in the chat.
Okay, do you mind repeating the question?
Okay, can animated image sequences import into Hype and create swiping effect similar to in5?
So I think what this is referring to, Jonathan, is there is this ability to have a smooth swiping experience. And so you can create what looks kind of like 3D animations, like 360 through a swipe.
Okay, so the answer is yes. There's not like a built-in like, this is the exact way to do that, but it's very easy with a couple of the constructs. So Hype supports importing animated image sequences. And then the second thing it does is it puts that on the timeline as an actual animation. And so if you use the answer from the other question is, which is, does Hype support dragging? You can set up a on drag action to control the timeline, which is then bound to that. So by basically doing a drag on your scene, you are controlling the animated image sequence.
Cool.
Okay. And similar to that one, kind of a going the other direction instead of from Hype to in5 back to Hype. Someone wanted to know, is it possible to import InDesign files into Hype to work on them in Hype?
It probably depends how you output them, would be my answer. I would be curious about your use case there, because InDesign is kind of a much bigger, here's your whole document, and Hype tends to be, here's a animation. I mean, it definitely can go in reverse. So I'd be curious about that. The basic way, maybe Justin, you have more thoughts on it, is that one of the elements Hype does provide, being a web format, is a HTML widget, which is basically an iframe, if you're familiar with that, for the HTML tag. It's just a kind of window on the page that points to another web page. And so you could potentially use that widget either pointing to a URL for something that you had exported from InDesign, or you could potentially bring in some of the HTML that way. That's probably how I would go about doing it.
Yeah, that's the only way I could imagine doing it, is if you export with in5 and then you import it into a container in Hype. But actually, like, taking all of the artwork or like bringing all the InDesign stuff into Hype as like editable artwork, I don't think so. Like, and just knowing the complexity of the InDesign format, I don't think they would want to take that on. It's just like a mess. But if you're talking about, do I want just I want to make a bigger Hype piece, and do I want just something that's like a little flip book or something that is unique to in5 and put it in there? Yeah, sounds like you should be able to do that. I'm gonna give Alan a chance to talk because he's been waiting patiently with his hand up here. And Alan, just go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have done.
All right, we can hear you.
Great. The only question I wondered about, I'm relatively new to in5, and I'd heard of Hype, but didn't know that much about it. When you were talking earlier, you were mentioning about when you'd finished the animation and then just exporting it as an OAM. I just wanted to check, how easy is it? A one-click export, or are there a bunch of options that you have to sort out before you export the OAM file?
Specifically in Hype, it's one click.
It's one click.
I guess technically it's in a submenu. It's in File, Export as HTML5 OAM, and then you give it.
But there's no options that you have to find. That was the thing I wanted to check, because obviously the thing that I really like about in5 is there's the idiot approach to exporting the HTML, which are the predefined settings, which I think are great. And then when you get a little bit more confident, then you can go into the individual settings. And I wondered how similar it was with Hype.
Arguably even easier. Yeah, it's just file, export, OAM.
Right.
It's really straightforward.
Brilliant. That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for your question, Alan. All right. Carolyn has another question. She's just been waiting so patiently. I want to give her a chance, and then we'll go back to questions from Erica. Let us know if you have Q&A questions, but I know Myra's got more questions waiting. So
will do.
Let's see. Carolyn, you go ahead.
I didn't realize my hand was still raised. That's funny. So I'm new to both in5. Is that how you're pronouncing it? in5?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and this new part of Hype. So that's kind of cool. I'm not new to Illustrator, Photoshop, all Adobe, animation. Like, I've done all of those things, websites. I'm not a big knowledge base for coding, especially JavaScript. That made me just want to cry. So what, I guess if I was to get if I bought one copy and played around with it, maybe one or two people, I mean, what if I was to work on this document, right? I mean, I can't really share it with anybody because then they wouldn't have the plugins, right? If I needed to, because I'm not the designer in the company. I just do all the production.
Mm-hmm.
So I would have to, I mean, it might be something worth, having one or two people try it, and then we could buy it. Maybe you have some sort of pricing system for the whole company kind of thing.
Are you talking about Hype or in5 right
Either
now?
way, I'm not sure. Now that I've seen them both for the first time demoed, I'm not sure what one does and what the other does. I'm sorry to say.
Gotcha. Well, yeah, I certainly with our licensing, you can move up at any point, and it prorates you, so you've got a lot of flexibility there, and so it can make sense to sign up and try it out. To your question about, are other people locked out? Can we pass the file around? Well, there are some esoteric challenges that come up with people you're kind of working on the same file, and having version management, stuff like that. The file, in terms of what you might have experienced with InDesign with plugins in the past, where you open a file that has a plugin used in it and it gives you a warning.
Yeah.
That may be what you're referring to. in5 doesn't do that. And if you have Hype content embedded in there as an OAM, it's not going to do that. You can have people work on pieces or pass the file around. And so long as they have all the assets, you do a file package or you have a links folder in there that has everything, you should be good. It's not going to give you a warning. There's plenty of things you can work on. But there will be interactive elements in InDesign that if people don't have in5, they might not be able to edit, but they'll certainly be able to work on open InDesign and work on the InDesign elements.
I'm just saying, if I did the in5 part, and I could have somebody else do the other part, that would be cool. Because if they try to open it and they wouldn't let them open it at all, that's a drag.
Right. No, you shouldn't run into anything like that with either product.
So now
or the products integrated.
I'm seeing a few links. It would be great if you could even just do a transcript of this chat, because there's a lot of great information in here. And I started trying to open some of them to save the URLs. And I was like, oh my God, overwhelmed. It'd be great if we could get a transcript. That would be so cool. Because now I feel like I need to separate, Hype is the animation part. I thought in5 did some of that too, no?
in5 does do some animation. So I think where you would see that tipping point is when you start to get into really sophisticated stuff. The thing that InDesign is so good at is really easy predefined animation, because you're just selecting a preset from a dropdown. I just want this to fly in from the left. Boom. We've got 3 or 4 things. Okay, I can animate all those, and I can set the timing so they go boom, 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 boom. And then when you start to get into something more sophisticated, I want this to animate based on, you saw, that dragging of the graph, or I want something to animate on a really complicated path. Those kind of things where you're going to reach a point where you're kind of maybe going to be able to hack it in InDesign, and then you're going to cross the threshold where it's just you can't create something that sophisticated.
That B thing you did, was that in in5 or was that Hype?
That was Hype.
Because that was cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess what I'll do is I'm going to try just doing some, maybe I saw the YouTube channels. I'm going to just go through the YouTube channels, because you can understand now I'm completely confused as to which does what.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, Hype is specifically animation, and then it's got a lot of great interactivity in there. And then think of InDesign goes with in5. So think about the document level.
Okay. All right. Great. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet. And I think, Myra, if you would put together notes with the links from the chat, I'll share those out when I share out the replay. So everybody who's on here, I'll make sure to send out an email with the replay, and we'll send some notes out as well with links.
Yeah, I want to show, I might edit some of it to show some of my coworkers to say, hey, this is what you can do. This is some pretty cool stuff. Let's be the studio that does this cool stuff, you know.
Sounds great. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the burden would be me to learn it and teach it to everybody. So like, all right, great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for your questions, Carolyn.
What I'll do right now, Carolyn, is I'm going to put in the main link to the Hype website where it says specifically what Hype does, and a main link to the in5 page, and it tells you specifically what in5 does.
So should I copy these or will you make the notes?
Oh, we'll have them in both, but you can look in the chat right now, and I just tagged you.
All right. Yeah. What I usually do with these things is seminars is I copy them as I'm going along, but I didn't because I'm crazy busy today. So I'm actually working and listening at the same time, as I'm sure we all do, right?
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you joining.
Oh, no, it was awesome. I meant to join these things sooner. I just didn't have a chance. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you bet.
Hey, Justin, building on that and incorporating a couple questions that we've had throughout the webinar is, can you just basically give the really brief overview of what the workflow is and like what each thing accomplishes? Like if you start with Hype and you get this, you put it into InDesign, which then with in5 exports becomes this, because there's been like questions about what each thing outputs and how it fits together.
Those are great questions. So, I mean, you saw from the initial pieces that Jonathan was showing that Hype is capable of doing entire standalone pieces. So there are cases where you'd just be creating something in Hype and you'd export HTML, and that end result is basically the same end result you get with in5. Like in all these cases, we're talking about getting HTML because that's the format that's viewable on all browsers. That's going to work across all these places. So that's our endpoint with all of those things. Now, there are cases where you're working on a document. So in InDesign, say you're creating a digital magazine or something. Let me share my screen again, just to make it crystal clear what we're talking about. So this is the Hype piece. This dark gray background with the slider. This is the Hype piece. This is the website version. And this container is in5, right? This is created in InDesign. Same here. This is the Hype piece, but we have these multiple pages. This is all InDesign with in5. So I've got this border at the bottom, and same with this piece, which is just a different design, right? But the same basic content. And the output, again, in this case, is HTML. So in this particular workflow, I mean, this works, I think, the way it works for a lot of real world pieces is that Daniel and Jonathan had this piece and they handed it off to me as an OAM. And, then we had a designer work on the InDesign document and they created this. And I went in and added some animations like that start button and some interactivity animations of things coming in and on the page. That's all done in InDesign. And we have lots of videos on doing that. And what I did was place this Hype document in there. And so what we have, which is, we've kind of talked about a little bit, is we have the circular nature of HTML. You can always put HTML inside of HTML. And just because you're using HTML doesn't mean you're doing any code whatsoever. So this overall workflow is that we have one team working on the animation, another team working on this InDesign piece, which is the overall document. And so we worked on the layout independent of this interactive piece and then put them together. And once all the content was ready, then I go up and I export and I choose my options and go to export. And once I do that, I then have HTML. Now I can view that locally, like these files are, you can see this is this is a file path. So this is just on my computer. This file is on the web. I can view it either way. This one's on the web so that this interaction between the two works, just because it's an intricacy of how browsers work in terms of having one piece be able to talk to another piece. But the workflow of the larger document is all built in InDesign. The animation interactivity in this piece, so you think of this as as its own separate piece, but then we integrated it into InDesign and exported it with in5. So hopefully that helps explain that larger piece. So you can imagine that you have somebody who's doing layout, and then you have somebody who is more of a specialist in animation, and possibly they're comfortable doing code, so they could add some really sophisticated stuff. So if you want to have a really detailed infographic, that might be something that you're doing in Hype, that you're integrating into this larger document that says like an annual report, right? And then you want to animate a bunch of your numbers. Well, some of that you can do in InDesign, but if you want to get, really, if you really want to wow the people reading it, then you'd go over to Hype, make it in Hype, and just import it in your document. You can have people working on it independently, or you could, if you're comfortable doing all of it, you can do all of it, integrate it. So it's not like there's one way to do it, but you have a lot of options. But that's kind of the workflow we're talking about. It's the workflow I've seen customers using, where they've got a Hype piece that they're bringing into InDesign. So hopefully that helps clarify. Jonathan, do you want to add anything to that, or Daniel?
I think one thing to think about on like when Hype is the right tool is if you're doing a lot of animation or interactivity. If you are not doing those, then Hype might not even be the right tool, because there are other tools for the web that probably can be more effective. So I would say, if you think about what is your overall document, if it's something in the digital publication realm, then starting with InDesign may be the right choice. And it may be a matter of, well, but I want these parts to be really interactive or to have very sophisticated animations. That's when you reach for Hype and pull it in, would be my general thought on the matter.
Yeah.
So there was another question that was kind of related to what you were you started at the answer with Hype is delivered as HTML. And the question, and I'm not sure if they are saying, they ask, is the exported file with Hype? And I don't know if they mean just with Hype or the in5 export with Hype as an OAM file. And so you guys can both answer that. With all the assets, so it can open and run in a browser not connected to the internet, like in a kiosk.
So from the Hype side, so generally what we've been talking about is exporting as an OAM widget, which is kind of like a self-contained module, which Adobe, at least I'm pretty sure it was Adobe, originally developed to get animations from one product to another, and we're just hijacking this format. That is under the hood like a zip, and yeah, it's got the HTML, but you wouldn't do that. Hype standard exports does export to a .html file, and you can double click that and open it. So the answer is basically yes, but not really for the OAM part, because that's intended to share to a product like InDesign. But Hype has a lot of different options. It can not only export as just a .html file with its associated assets, it can also do video export or animated GIF export. So there's a lot of different ways to get your content either offline and use it that way, or into different applications.
Nice. Well, answering about the kiosk portion too, because both products export HTML as an endpoint, there are several kiosk apps that will just take HTML, and then they do the wrapping and create the kiosk for you. So either one, creating from Hype or with in5, basically you're ready for a kiosk. Like you just take that format and then you just need the product that wraps it and makes it into a kiosk app. So you're good with either one of those products to go through to a kiosk. I see that Ed has his hand raised. So Ed, you are good to unmute when you're ready.
Oh, thanks everybody. Hey, this question is probably for the Hype crew. I'm a video editor and I've been working in Premiere and After Effects, and we're deploying a little bit more interactivity to our lessons. They are delivered via HTML5. I've been able to kind of start creating some interactions and have some pretty good success so far, but is there a good resource? And I don't know JavaScript at all, but I want to add a little bit more complexity to these. For instance, I choose all the things that apply and you can only move forward once all the things are selected type of deal. Is there a good resource, being a JavaScript newbie, that I can go to and find maybe some, I don't know, shortcuts, or if this is what you want to do, this is the code snippet you need type of thing? And I'll shut up and let you guys answer.
I would say probably a good starting point is our forums. They're pretty active. It's a good community of people, and there's often folks who have asked, like, how do I do this? And in general, our dividing line on interactivity with code versus not code is, does it require logic? And if it requires some logic, then that's going to be something on the JavaScript code side that you're going to need to do. The problem with the creative field is every creative endeavor is a little bit different, and sometimes what is seemingly minute but vitally important to the creator's end goals. And so that's always a problem with, like, is there a JavaScript code snippet? There very well could be, depending on what you want to do, but often the devil's in the details, and you may want to say, well, this does most of what I want, but I need it to display this message differently, or jump to the scene and it didn't provide for it. The good news is there's people on the forums who are coders and generally will help or point you in the right direction. But coding is, of course, like a big field.
Yeah, and you'll definitely find a lot of downloadable examples, not just long strings of code, so you could see exactly how people put them together too. Yeah.
Great, thanks guys. I'll just hit the forums.
Great, thanks, Ed. Erica or Myra, is there anything popping up?
There's a couple questions about how the hype OAMs in InDesign play with MSOs.
They don't, basically. You can put them in. No, I mean, you can put them in MSOs. But I'm sorry, I was being glib in terms of interactivity. They can't.
Right.
They can't really talk to each other. I mean, you could maybe write some JavaScript that would work once you put it online, but I don't think that it. I wouldn't expect to be able to, like, click something in a hype piece and interact and create interactivity in a multi-state object.
So it could appear in one. You can have it appear through an MSO, but then you can't interact with it because it's an image, correct? I mean,
no, you can interact with it. I guess what I'm saying is you can't put a button in hype that then tells your MSO to go to a different state. Not easily, anyway.
Right.
But you could have an MSO that, like, let's say it's empty and you click a button and then it comes up and there's your hype piece. And then you click another button and it goes to state 2, there's a different hype piece. And then you click a button and it goes back to your original state and it's empty and it hides the hype. Yes, you should be able to do all of that. But so I just don't know. But but blending interactivity between them, probably not. You should think of it sort of like Jonathan was just describing earlier about a container. Like, it lives in a container and you can, hide and show the container with object states. And if you really want to dig into it and you're doing something sophisticated and it has to be just so, you could change that. I mean, the other option is to actually, you can create something akin to states and hype. So if you need interactivity blending with the view changing, maybe that should just be a hype piece instead of a multi-state object. So hopefully that gives you some ideas.
Okay, this last comment in the chat, I think that was to clarify. So if you click an in5 InDesign button, then can you get the hype piece to start or stop, etc.?
It should. So if it's in a multi-state object and you go from let's say an empty state to a state with a hype container in it, it should reload the iframe when that happens, I believe, and which would cause the hype to start again. So I believe that's the case. And if it's not, we could certainly something we can look at.
And there was a similar question from earlier too. So I don't know if this was from the same person or not. Can different scenes be fired in different slides in an iframe? So,
okay, so I feel like there's probably more information that I need, but ultimately speaking, the answer is probably going to be a yes. It may require a little bit of code to do that, because it sounds like you have maybe your hype. This is how I'm imagining it set up, that you have your hype document in an iframe and then some other things that are outside. And it could be the hype document is within an iframe within a in5 exported document, or it could be a regular web page. But ultimately you have your iframe, which is the self-contained kind of web view, and then something coming from the outside. So inside the iframe, Hype has an API, and that API does allow you to change scenes as you would like. And so it's kind of a matter of getting the code from the outside to go into the iframe to receive it. There's a few different ways to do it, some of which depends on how the domain is being hosted, because you actually have security concerns on like a parent talking to a child and vice versa. So you may have to do like some JavaScript code that does a post message. You may be able to talk to it more directly. There is one solution that comes to mind. I think Daniel may have written the original code for it or the forum post. And it's that you can have, there's a little code snippet that allows you to change scenes based on the anchor tag in the URL. So, you know, there's the little like # anchor tag. So what you could actually do in that regard is you could say, oh, have the iframe change its source or its URL to basically the same URL, but an anchor tag with a scene name. And so if you adopt that inside, then you could automatically change scenes. Hopefully that answers the question, and that's what you were going for. But there are different ways to do the communication to kind of drive hype documents. Changing scenes is one of the ways in which you can drive it.
All right, I think we're at the half hour. How are we doing on questions?
We're through them all, with the exception of people asking for, can you share these examples? So maybe we can make things available.
Or for the people asking about examples, if you could just write in the chat, are you wanting like the original files or are you wanting the output files? I'm guessing you probably want the original files, but if you could go ahead and put that in.
So the two questions were, can you send me an example of a digital magazine that is truly responsive? My team won't let me use this for our magazine because of ADA issues. And the other one was, could you please share the InDesign example file for your demo?
Sorry, I was just writing down the responsive magazine.
Oh.
And what was the very last thing you said?
Could you please share the InDesign example file of your demo? So I guess the one that you did today.
InDesign file of demo today. Okay. We'll look into that. We'll see if that's possible to share. Somebody had their hand up, and if you want to put your hand back up, we can make sure to answer. But it sounds like we're kind of winding down. We're getting most of the questions answered. There we go. Isaiah, I see you. Go ahead and unmute when you're ready.
Hey, thank you. I just had a question about either product, and if any company was willing to mention some exciting opportunities in the future on the product roadmap, or if not, that's okay, but something that maybe excites both of your teams about what's coming down the pipeline in the future, maybe not for your company, but for the web in general and presentations.
All right.
So we do not publicly talk about our roadmap, unfortunately, so I'm sorry about that. But I think I would say in general that I've been really pleased with, in our last version, the amount of vector shape adoption. And so I think that's a feature that will continue to get some love. And I think also one thing that we've been working with with some partners is improving some workflow and extensibility. And so that's always a direction that we're going to go forward in. So that's kind of my non-answer answer.
Sure.
That we're excited about some very specific things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like to surprise and delight. And I think when you say what you're going to do, there's always sometimes engineering issues get in the way, or sometimes various random things where work gets reprioritized gets in the way. So we've kind of learned that we don't reveal our roadmap, but we do listen to feedback, and feedback's taken seriously. So if you have feature requests, feel free to shoot us an email. And those always get log prioritized. And it's always the type of thing where when we get a feature request, it's like back to the top of mind. And maybe that's something that we can do immediately.
Yeah, that's great. I totally get that. We certainly run into those things. I want to echo your sentiment about feedback. Well, we just thrive on feedback, completely driven. To that extent, I don't have an ETA on this particular feature, but I know one thing that people have been asking for a lot is search within documents, and so that is probably our highest priority right now in terms of new features. Hoping to introduce it this year, but like Jonathan said, I'd like to underpromise and overdeliver. So we'll see, and it's going to require a lot of feedback. So actually, if you're on our email list, at some point I'll be asking to do a session like this where we can talk through some of the things like, should it be searching through hidden content and multi-state objects? There's going to be weird stuff like that that we need to figure out in order to actually implement it. I will say generally, one thing we sort of touched upon at one point in the webinar that I'm just really loving about web technology is that there was this growing pain of kind of switching the web from being largely dependent on Flash to non-Flash, and we used to have all these fallback formats during the transition, and now the fact that we have a semi-standardization of media in terms of pretty much everything supports MP4 video, pretty much everything supports MP3 audio, it's a lot less thought required. Microsoft has completely sunsetted Internet Explorer, which was always a pain, and Edge is built on Chromium or Blink or whatever. Like they're largely much more standard than they used to be. It doesn't mean there aren't specific browser quirks, but the playing field is a lot less bumpy. And so that means it opens up a lot of opportunity to create really cool content that can be reliably displayed on everybody's device. And with these two tools, you have the ability to make them pieces responsive too, so that you can adjust to the person's device. So I think that's a pretty nice development overall in the industry. Thanks for your questions, Isaiah. All right. Unless I hear, this is going to be like last call. Anybody who wants to raise their hand and ask a question, go for it now. Or we'll see you on the next webinar sometime in the future. All right. I think that's it. Thank you everybody for staying on so long. Thanks to Jonathan and Daniel for coming on and showing hype. It was exciting to get to see that, and I know there were a lot of people getting a cool introduction to it, and hopefully everybody learned something or got some inspiration. And I'll say stay safe, keep staying safe, and we'll hope to see you again in the future. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah.